Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about the infamous Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? Is everyone sad that Halloween is over? I'm super sad. I still haven't taken anything down. It might be a while. And no, I will not be decorating for Christmas. I'm taking down my Halloween and putting up fall. Thanksgiving, whatever you want to call it. I'm not even thinking about Christmas. Oh, and I am drinking it was one I found. It's called Paulina Rosso Sweet Red Wine. And I'm drinking it in my spooky skeleton hand glass. And the shirt I am wearing is a Freddy shirt. And it's from a Nightmare on Elm Street Dream Warrior, the third Freddy Krueger movie. So that's what I'm wearing. I'll post a picture of both of those. And so, yeah, let's get into it. This might be a little bit of a longer episode. I have a lot of information, and Waverly Hills is a really cool, crazy place. A lot of information, which I'm sure I don't have everything in here. So, yeah, let's get going. So, most of you have probably heard of the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. And if you haven't, well, I don't know where you've been. It is probably the most haunted place in America. Yes, I said in America. It's pretty freaking creepy. But let's rewind to the beginning, to the history behind Waverly Hills and how it came to be. Waverly Hills wasn't originally a hospital. Major Thomas H. Hayes bought the land outside of Louisville, Kentucky in 1883. There were no schools in the immediate area, so he decided to build a one-room schoolhouse for his kids. He only hired one teacher, named Lizzie Lee Harris, and she was a huge fan of the long series of novels by Sir Walter Scott, known as the Waverly Novels. So she asked Hayes if the school could be named the Waverly School. Hayes agreed and ended up naming the entire property Waverly Hills. For people living in the late 19th and early 20th century, tuberculosis was both an incredibly contagious infection and difficult to diagnose early on. This proved a recipe for long-term disaster, as people with active tuberculosis infections could spread the virus for weeks or months before being diagnosed. The problems this caused worsened as urbanization took hold of the Midwestern United States. At the beginning of the 20th century, Louisville, Kentucky had one of the highest rates of tuberculosis deaths in the United States. The beginning of industrialism as well as geographic makeup were contributing factors. As the population of Jefferson County exploded to nearly 263,000 people by 1910, infrastructure and sanitation struggled to keep up. In crowded and unsanitary conditions, tuberculosis soon became an issue of plague proportions, being labeled the White Plague by local press. As cases and deaths mounted, nestled in the Ohio Valley, Louisville didn't get the proper amount of fresh airflow. In an attempt to contain the disease, a board of tuberculosis hospital was established in 1906. The search began for a proper location to construct the much-needed facility. Eventually, Hayes' property was chosen for several reasons: its distance from the city, its picturesque, tranquil view, as well as its high altitude with increased airflow. The board decided to keep the name Waverly, as it had a peaceful sound to it. Construction on the site began in 1908, and it officially opened on July 26, 1910. The original sanatorium was a wooden two-story hospital with a half-timber design, with an administration building and the open-air pavilions for the patients to be exposed to air and sun. It only accommodated about 50 patients, roughly half male and half female. But in 1910, with tuberculosis reaching epidemic proportions in the area, and Louisville being particularly hit hard due to its low-lying positions on the waters of the Ohio River, the building wasn't big enough to house all the patients, and they were soon overwhelmed with over 140 patients. As a result, with donations of money and land, construction soon began on a much larger facility in 1924. The new building would be 4 stories of brick and concrete, sprawling across 180,000 square feet, including separate rooms for patients rather than communal ones, sunrooms, labs, and recreation rooms. This new hospital was designed to hold up to 500 patients and opened in 1926. Waverly was its own community. It had its own post office, dentist, and barber shop. And because they weren't sure how TB was contracted, once you came to Waverly as a patient or as staff, you were not permitted to leave until a cure was found. Sadly, the main use for the hospital was to isolate those who had come down with the disease and to keep them away from those who had not. Families were tragically divided, with parents and even children forced into the sanitarium with little contact with their loved ones. The new structure was considered the most advanced tuberculosis sanatorium in the country. But even then, most of the patients succumbed to the disease. There was no medicine available at that time to treat the disease, and so many patients were offered rest, fresh air, and lots of nutritious foods. The patients were put outside along with their beds to absorb as much fresh air and sunlight as they could. Even in the midst of winter, there are pictures that show patients who are literally covered in snow while they are recovering in the yard. That's freaking crazy. I don't know how that's supposed to make them get better. But other treatments were much less pleasant and definitely bloodier. Because there was no proper medical treatment, they started experimental treatments. So this isn't going to end well. It never does. One of these treatments was to surgically implant balloons. Yes, I said balloons, like from a kid's birthday party, inside the ill lungs and then fill it with air to expand the lungs. Needless to say, this often had disastrous results. Ribs and muscles were also removed to give the lungs more space to breathe and expand. Sometimes they deliberately caused a collapsed lung to give the lung some rest. The last straw was a lobectomy, where an entire lobe of the lung was removed. Yeah, I'm sure that's going to help. This blood-soaked procedure was seen as a last resort, and many patients did not survive it. No shit. While the patients who survived both the disease and the treatments left Waverly through the front door, many others left through what came to be known as the body chute. This shit looks creepy. I'll post pictures of it when I post on Instagram, so definitely check that out so you can see how creepy this shit is. The body chute was not originally intended for bodies at all. When the building was constructed, architects did not plan for how to heat such a massive space. Doctors didn't want furnaces or boilers on top of the hill because they interfered with the patient's heliotherapy, which was the fresh air and sunlight that was supposedly helping them. So this tunnel was built to move heat and later on supplies from the bottom of the hill up to Waverly. But with TB reaching its height and death counts at a high, the tunnel was used to move bodies out of the sanatorium. This enclosed tunnel for the dead led from the hospital to the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill. Using a motorized rail and cable system, the bodies were lowered in secret to the waiting trains. This was done so the patients would not see how many were leaving the hospital as corpses. Their mental health, the doctors believed, was just as important as their physical health. By the late 1930s, tuberculosis had begun to decline around the world. By 1943, new medicines had been developed in the United States. However, as Kentucky Historic Institutions explains, this treatment wasn't made available to the patients at Waverly until 1949. Slowly but steadily, the population at Waverly Hills was decreasing, but in a good way, by being actually cured with medicine. In 1962, Waverly Hills closed as a tuberculosis hospital, and all of its patients were transferred to a regular hospital. The building subsequently sat empty for nearly a year before the facility was reopened in 1963 as Woodhaven Geriatric Center, a live-in nursing facility for elderly patients with dementia, mobility issues, and severe mental disabilities. Woodhaven operated in this capacity until 1982, when it was closed by the state. A grand jury found multiple instances of patient abuse and signs of neglect of the facility itself. Woodhaven was closed, and all of its patients were transferred to another care facility. After Woodhaven closed, the majority of the land and buildings were auctioned off and changed hands many times over the course of the next 2 decades. In 1983, a developer purchased the property with plans to use the main building as a minimum security state prison. However, a massive wave of protests from locals squashed this plan, and the backup plan of turning the building into apartments also collapsed due to lack of funds. In March 1996, Waverly Hills and the surrounding land was purchased by Robert Alberhasky, who ran Christ the Redeemer Foundation. He had plans to construct the world's tallest statue of Jesus on the Waverly site, along with an art and worship center. The statue, which was inspired by the famed Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, like on the Fast and the Furious movie, that's what I thought of, was to be situated on the roof of the hospital at a cost of about, $4 million. That's all. The next phase of his plan was to convert the sanatorium into a chapel, theater, and gift shop for another $8 million. Not surprisingly, donations to the project fell far short of what was expected. During the first year, only $3,000 was raised towards the effort, and the project was canceled in December 1997. Alberhasky abandoned the Waverly Hills property and then, in order to recoup some of his costs, tried to have the property condemned so that the building could be torn down and redeveloped. This plan was blocked by the county, and according to rumor, demolition work was then done around the southern edge of the building in order to undermine the structural foundations and collect insurance money. This scheme also failed, and the place sat vacant. Because of this, Waverly turned into a magnet for teenagers looking for a thrill and homeless people looking for shelter. Because of the history, people believed it was haunted. Many broke into the place in search of paranormal evidence. The result was a vandalized and trashed location. Fortunately, in 2001, it fell into the hands of Charlie and Tina Mattingly. They saved the building from demolishment and established the Waverly Hills Historical Society to raise money for the restoration of the building's interior. Over the course of the next year, volunteers working towards the restoration of the building experienced ghostly sounds, heard slamming doors, saw lights appear in the building when there should have been none, had objects thrown at them, were struck by unseen hands, saw apparitions in the doorway, in corridors, and more. Waverly Hills now primarily serves as a haunted attraction with ghost tours and annual haunted house events. The building has been featured on numerous paranormal television programs, including Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters, Travel Channel's Ghost Adventures, VH1's Celebrity Paranormal Project, Destination America's Ghost Asylum and Paranormal Lockdown, the BuzzFeed Unsolved web series, among others. It has also been a filming location for movie productions, including the 2005 horror film Death Tunnel, which had a majority of its filming done at Waverly Hills. I'm gonna have to check that out. I haven't seen that. Its ghost tours book out months in advance, and paranormal investigations now occur months in advance, and paranormal investigations now occur almost weekly. And paranormal investigations now occur almost weekly, with thousands of investigators visiting annually and coming away with new photos, EVPs, and stories to share. Though the era of tuberculosis is long behind us, the story and legend of Waverly Hills Sanatorium remains and seems to get stronger with every investigation and public event. So kind of like Rose Red, like it's feeding it? I don't know. Feeding the energy of the place. While once a place of great suffering that no member of the public would willingly visit, Waverly Hills has become a building you'd have to fight to keep people away from. So now I want to get into the good stuff and talk about some of the paranormal activity that has been reported at Waverly. The hospital gained a reputation for being haunted, and stories began to circulate of resident ghosts like the little girl running up and down the third floor solarium, the little boy spotted with a leather ball, the hearse that appears in the back of the building dropping off coffins, the woman with the bleeding wrists who cried for help, and others. Visitors have told of slamming doors, lights in the windows as if power was still running through the building, strange sounds, and eerie footsteps in empty rooms. Sometimes the reports of footsteps are paired with the unexplainable appearance of visible footsteps in the dusty halls and rooms. Guests have also run into strange, sudden cold spots in all areas of the building, though these may source from the lack of paned windows. In certain areas, investigators have further reported more aggressive entities and have experienced being pushed or otherwise coaxed away from particular rooms by malevolent spirits. Along with the vivid apparitions seen within, many shadow figures are also spotted from outside Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Some are seen lingering on the roof or slowly strolling up there. Others are caught peeking out of the large open windows at visitors. Along with these countless apparitions, disembodied voices are a fixture of the Waverly Hills experience. Numerous visitors have heard these mysterious, ghostly voices, and many people have taken recordings inside the building hoping to capture them. On the roof, where the children were given their sun therapy, the creepy song, Ring Around the Rosie, is heard. In the kitchen, a male figure with a white coat is seen. His appearance is often associated with cooking smells like freshly baked bread. But it's impossible to prepare food in this room because it's a ruin now. On the third floor, the children's wing, a girl without eyes is often seen. And that's creepy. The infamous 600-foot body chute that was used to discreetly move thousands of corpses through the facility has grown in infamy. and is often cited as a place where ghostly experiences take place. Investigators have reported deep uneasiness while staring into the abyssal tunnel and being overcome with feelings of both grief and panic while inside. Visitors who have braved the tunnel have reported the sounds of voices in the dark and, most frighteningly of all, a shadowy apparition that seemed to follow them. Luckily, this entity is known to keep its distance, but more than a few investigators have felt the need to exit the body chute in a run. In a 2017 interview, Tina Mattingly said orbs and balls of light are believed to have been seen in the chute along with spirits. Perhaps the greatest and most controversial legend of Waverly Hills was connected to the fifth floor building. One of these, room 502, is the subject of many rumors and legends, and just about every curiosity seeker that had broken into Waverly Hills over the years wanted to see it. It is believed in 1928, nurse Mary Hillenberg committed suicide in there by hanging herself from the light fixture. She was 29 years old at the time of her death. It is alleged that she was unmarried and pregnant by a doctor in the sanatorium, and he wanted nothing to do with the baby, and that is why she killed herself. Other versions say that it was the hospital owner who impregnated her. It is unknown how long she may have been hanging in this room before her body was discovered, and this would not be the only tragedy to occur with a connection to room 502. In 1932, it is said another nurse jumped from her death from the same room's window. No one seems to know why she would have done this, but many have speculated that she may have actually been pushed over the edge. It is common for women to become very nauseous or dizzy when they go inside this room, especially if they are pregnant. Years later, a homeless man was murdered in this room by a drug gang. Often the words, "Get out," are heard here when people want to step inside. Those are just the stories. As with many legends, no records exist to say that any of it actually happened. There are also conflicted accounts as to how the woman managed to hang herself. Some say she did it from the light fixture, others from a pipe over the door, and some say from the rafters. But there are no rafters. The pipe over the door was part of a sprinkler system installed in 1972, and the light fixture is hung on a light decorative chain that would not hold the weight of a person. There is no actual documentation of either death, although some claim the stories were verified by a former staff member, John Thornberry, who died in 2006. According to his obituary, he was born in 1922, which would have made him 6 and 10 years old at the time of the alleged deaths that connected to room 502. This makes his verification more than a little problematic. So what actually happened in room 502 that would cause so many people to claim paranormal experiences there? It seems that something did occur in that room to cause the legend to take root in the first place. One of the most popular ghosts is a child named Timmy. According to legend, Timmy was a 6 or 7-year-old boy who died in Waverly, but is still unable to move on to the next life. Timmy moves around the hospital, either carrying his leather ball or seeking something else to play with. Visitors who go to Waverly often bring with them toy balls to entice Timmy to play with them. Though he isn't spotted too often, Timmy is notorious for playing games with visitors, often rolling balls back and forth for fun. Another notable apparition, and probably the creepiest, is known as the Creeper, due to, you guessed it, its creeping, crawling movements up and around the walls, ceilings, and floors. It is said that proximity to the creeper brings with it an overwhelming feeling of dread. While there is no explanation for who or what the creeper might be, some think it might have been a mistreated patient whose contorted appearance reflects the trauma they experience in life. At any rate, that's a lot of darkness for a place founded on the principle of fighting disease with sunshine. Okay, so now I want to read you a story that I found on Reddit about someone's experience at Waverly. I just thought I'd read it. Hello, all. A fellow Redditor asked me to share a post about some of the experiences I had while investigating Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. As I stated in a post in the R Paranormal subreddit, I have been researching and investigating the paranormal since 1988. I do have my own team, and I have visited some of the most notorious haunted locations in the U.S. I should also mention that I am sensitive, and this gift does enhance my investigations. This post will be somewhat long, but hopefully it grabs your interest and you read through it to the end. I visited Waverly Hills back in July of 2012 and had 3 investigators with me, Eric, Tommy, and Debbie. If you have never seen the building before, it is worth looking up. It's huge and incredible to see in person. It will be hard for me to sum up my experiences without going into great detail, because I feel that the full effect of these experiences can only be truly felt with very vivid descriptions, but I will do my best. This was the only place I have ever investigated that made me uneasy enough to want to leave. But this sensation only came over me when my team and I entered the 5th floor. Legend states that when the hospital was in operation between 1910 and 1961, a nurse had an affair with a doctor and became pregnant. Not only that, but she, and therefore her unborn baby, had contracted tuberculosis, the disease the sanatorium was determined to cure. Unable to handle the stresses of her transgression, and unable to bear the thought of her child being born with the disease, she performed her own abortion and threw her baby into the sewer system. And then she hanged herself. Note: this claim is not conclusively substantiated, it is just legend/folklore. I am not saying that this is the particular entity I encountered, I am just including this as background. Hospital staff, as well as patients, contracted TB and passed away from the disease, so the entity I interacted with here at Waverly could have been any one of those nurses. As I mentioned earlier, I am sensitive. In a previous investigation at Prospect Place Mansion in Dresden, Ohio, I made a connection with a female spirit there. It became so strong that at one point, while communicating with her and other entities through an SB7 spirit box, I started to feel her emotions and became so overwhelmed that I started to cry. Once the session was concluded, my own feelings came back to me, but the residue of her energy stayed with me for the duration of the night. At Waverly, once we reached the 5th floor, I became extremely apprehensive. Usually I will be at the front of my team, guiding them to particular locations according to the strengths of the energies in the building. Sometimes I will follow behind in an effort to sort of protect my teammates. In this particular case, I did neither. Feeling incredibly nervous, I put my back up against the wall and would not move away from it. I tried to maintain my composure as best I could, but I felt slightly safer and less exposed. I wanted so badly to leave, but I knew that I could not abandon an investigation or my team. I could not let them down. In my uncomfortable state, I pressed on, leading my team in an EVP session. We began asking basic questions to try to see if there were any intelligent entities with us. One investigator stated that we wouldn't judge her for what had happened to her. and that it was safe for her to talk to us. After a few moments of silence, I heard footsteps walking around us. Later on, when I reviewed the audio, I heard 4 clear footsteps, which sounded like a lady's heeled shoes clicking on the linoleum. It was a fast-paced walk, as if she had somewhere important to be. Perhaps a doctor required her assistance in surgery. This would lead to other experiences throughout the night. After the 5th floor, we made our way back down to the 1st floor. I move around according to the pool of the energy in the building, to the electroshock therapy room. In here, we decide to separate, with each of us in a different corner of the room. It's a big room. We decided to conduct an SB7 Spirit Box session, and we were not disappointed. Please note that there was virtually zero radio interference due to the building's location and distance from any major cities or radio towers. We started with the usual introductory statements and asked the usual questions. What I look for is intelligence, so I try to elicit real-time responses from any entities which might be present. I said out loud that we had come a long way to speak with them, that we had traveled all the way from New York. I asked if they knew where New York was. A female voice came through the box. North. Having received an intelligent response, I asked if she could tell me the name of any one person on my team. The same female voice came through again and said, Thomas. Naturally, we were impressed. We continued on. Having received 2 intelligent responses, both in the same female's voice, I said, I'm hearing a female. Do we have a lady here? What came next? What came next was disturbing. 3 different voices, dark voices, came through, joined together, saying, Don't speak with her. This sent chills down my spine. I have chills right now. Oh, that's creepy. I started asking questions like, who am I speaking with now? Why can't I speak with her? What do you want with her? I told them that they had no right to keep her and told them to let her go. If they ever did, I do not know. We did not receive another response from those dark voices, nor did we hear from the nurse, as I presume that is who we were communicating with. In this room again, we moved on. Next, we went back upstairs, this time to the 4th floor's main operating room. Liking the idea of using trigger objects, objects relative to a particular point in time in history, which might be familiar to entities that could reside there, I brought dusk masks with us to simulate as doctors' masks. In this room, Eric took on the role as the doctor. We started another spirit box session. Tommy asked, Do we have any nurses here who can help us? A female voice responded, Yes. I then asked, Do we have a nurse here? Can you come over to the doctor and let him know that you're here and that you're ready? Again, the female voice, Here. I asked, You're here? Nurse, how many patients do we have on the list for today? The female voice responds, 3. My theory here is that she recognized Eric as the doctor. Perhaps she thought the other 3 of us were patients. The conversation continued. Tommy, what's the first step? Nurse, give him first aid. We asked more questions like this, but she did not respond to them. The next question she did respond to was mine, approximately 4 minutes after her previous response. Me, can you tell us any of our names? We are the doctor's assistants. Nurse, 3. We continued trying to converse with her, but this was the last response she gave us. I felt that after a few moments of her silence, she had left the room. My final encounter with the nurse of Waverly Hills happened after our investigation had ended at 3 a.m. We had gathered up all of our gear and headed back down to the gift shop, which had been designated as headquarters for the evening. Our tour guide had stayed down there while we conducted our investigation, but when we got back down there, he had asked if any of us would be willing to go back into the building with him so that he could lock up. Of course, we all volunteered to go, and so we did. No longer feeling uneasy, I followed up at the back of the group, hoping to get a few moments away from everyone to experience the last bit of energy that Waverly was willing to share with me. As I was walking past a very large room, I'm not exactly sure which room it was, as it was still pitch black inside the building, I distinctly heard a woman speaking. It had definite female vocal tones, and she spoke a full sentence as if having a conversation with someone else. Unfortunately, I could not make out what she was saying, but I know for a fact that I heard her disembodied voice with my own ears. This was a really amazing experience for me, as I had never had such a strong connection with the spirit before. This nurse was with us from the beginning of all of our investigations until the very end, saving that last little bit of evidence just for me. She made the night truly special, one I will never forget. I can't wait to get back there and investigate again. I wonder if she'll remember me. So that is all the information I have for y'all. And so I have been wanting to cover Waverly Hills for a while. I first learned about Waverly Hills. Listened to another podcast. It's called XV Planus, and it's an awesome podcast. One of my favorites. One of the podcasts that actually inspired me to want to start my own podcast. If you haven't checked it out, you definitely should. So he has an episode where he's been there and had an encounter with a creeper. It's so creepy. I mean, obviously it's called The Creeper, but also Astonishing Legends has an episode about Waverly Hills too. So those are the two podcasts that I first heard about Waverly Hills. And I think after that, I ended up just like researching and like a bunch of podcasts that had done episodes on Waverly Hills and just listened to all of them. It's just crazy how much energy this place has and just how, in a very active place where a lot of bad things happen. Isn't it so weird that like it never was demolished? Like it wanted to be, they wanted to demolish it and get rid of it and redevelop it so many times, but for some reason they never let that happen. And so I think there's something more behind that. So much death and sadness that happened there that I think makes it so active. Super creepy, but I would love to know what y'all think. Have any of y'all heard of Waverly Hills Sanatorium? Have any of you been there? Have any of you had experiences there? I would love to hear about it. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the D.E.A.D podcast1 at gmail.com or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and leave the podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. That would help so much and definitely boost the podcast. So if you haven't done so already, please leave a 5-star review. It greatly, greatly helps, and I greatly appreciate it so much. And be sure to come back next week for my next episode.